Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Pain Podcast. This week we sat down in Las Vegas at the Pain Science in Motion conference with a friend and colleague, Nick Rainey. Nick is an accomplished physical therapist and clinic owner who has really developed a practice where expertise and excellence are the rule. We discussed the necessity of mentorship to really boost your journey to expertise.
And I think it's important that people go through residency and fellowship training or some type of long track training. They need mentorship. That's really what they need. And they need structured mentorship. If you don't get structured mentorship, it's difficult to become an expert quickly. And I need these people to become experts. We can't wait a few years.
Nick and I discussed how he searched out expertise actively to improve his own practice.
So this was after fellowship where you decided like, hey, I need to this is somewhere I need to like up my game. So you decided I'm going to find somebody who's doing it, who's been, like you said, doing it longer than you've been alive. And those are the people you search out.
We discussed our experience and how there is a broader understanding of what it means to have good hands with patients.
When the patient believes that you're good, they get better faster. And so when you're better with your hands, is that because you're a ninja or is that because then they believe you more?
We talked about this and much more in this week's episode. If you can do me one favor this week, I'd love it if you could share this episode with somebody who may be early in their journey and trying to find their way in their own journey to expertise. If you aren't subscribed yet, please do so. And if you're really getting value out of the podcast, I'd love it if you could just give a review so this information get to more people who really need it. Now, on to the episode.
This is the Modern Pain Podcast with Mark Cardula.
Nick Rainey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Mark.
We're in Pain Science in Motion here in Las Vegas. It's a live podcast. First time we've done this. This is episode 2 here while we're in Las Vegas. You and I have both been through fellowship, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to discuss kind of the whole fellowship process, because manual therapy, as you know, has had an assault on social media. And I think in some ways good. There's been a lot to criticize about traditional manual therapy, right? Some of the stuff that we see online and some of the crazy stuff we see online with like bruising people and all this stuff, but that's not what we're talking about. And this kind of follows up with the episode we had with Jason Silvernail. You and I were talking about that before we went on air. But before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of that, can you kind of introduce yourself to the folks as far as kind of where you're at, what you're up to, and kind of your journey with kind of manual therapy?
Oh, sure. I'm in Sierra Vista, Arizona, which no one knows where that is. It's the bottom of the U.S. Our county borders New Mexico and Mexico. It's a decent area, though. There's about 75,000 metro people. It's southeast of Tucson. We're in the mountains, so it's not as hot as most of Arizona. So we appreciate that, particularly here in the coming months. So I have my primary practice is Rainey Pain and Performance. We have several clinicians there, and everybody that practices with us has to do some long track training, residency or fellowship training. And then I have a sub practice. It's Sierra Vista Headache and TMJ Specialists. It's basically a marketing gimmick, if you will. There's a separate page for it. It's a separate business line for it. So when people call and everything, I have a separate room for it. But it's run as a sub practice in the same building. That way I can market and then specifically look at how I'm doing with that population, schedule it a little bit differently and whatnot. So I enjoy doing that. And then I partnered with somebody to do, Tony Rich, to do a Medicaid practice. So in Arizona, the acronym for Medicaid is ACCESS. And so this is access therapy. It's accessible care for people on access. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. We also have our own in-house residency program. And so I do a lot of teaching with that because I lead most of that. I don't do all the teaching. We have, like I said, all of our clinicians have done some type of long track training, so we can bring a lot of expertise with areas that other people are better at than me.
Your journey, like with manual therapy yourself, I'm curious, like where because we all have our stories, right, with manual therapy, and as far as our training, I thought in school, I know you've listened to the podcast, you've probably heard my shtick with the whole thing. As far as like that was my pursuit, like I thought it had to be like this amazingly nuanced, millimeter detection skills with my hands, and obviously that shifted for me. How has been your journey with manual therapy as far as you've kind of come up with it over the years?
Yeah, that's as I listen to your journey, mine is different than yours. Mine's a little bit more opposite. I probably started off more, I think was it Seth's podcast when you talked about like some people just turn off their brain with it. That's more where I was earlier in my career. And and then I've become more nuanced as I've progressed in my career. And we all think we're right wherever we're at that point in time, right? So I'm not oblivious to that. But early in my career, as a student, I was given a more of a psychosocial point of view of this. And then, so I was with Tim Flynn was our ortho professor, and so we had some association with evidence in motion. So 45 weeks as a student, we had a long clinical under fellows, and so it was kind of like a residency program. We had posts that we had to do online, we had rounds and whatnot. And then I went right into residency and fellowship training. And I've become a little bit more detailed a few years into my career. And so I feel like I have a healthy appreciation for the limitations, but also for the value that it can provide for people.
I mean, it's nice to have that kind of experience, right? I wish I would have had like that more residency, because it kind of instills this clinical thinking, critical reasoning that if you all read the OMPT paper that Jason Silvernail's episode refers to, we'll link it in the show notes. But that unfortunately, manual therapy gets lumped in with this, like, turn your brain off and just rub or poke or jab a needle or whatever it may be into that, where there's a lot more nuance and thought. Like, you're not definitely turning your brain off when you're doing manual therapy, if you're going to make it through a residency and fellowship. What's been your experience with kind of seeing what gets portrayed out there online with manual therapy, and then what your experience has been with, learning and the thinking that goes behind it?
Yeah, so I guess I don't see as much stuff online. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I hear what is said, and I feel like I do have a little bit limited view of what is predominantly out there, because we run around with people that are typically think like us, and so, and there are times when I'm teaching to a group, particularly like orofacial pain is where I teach the most, and it's typically not the people that I've typically been associated with. And so they have more varied backgrounds. And I quite enjoy it, but then it is tougher to know where they're coming from. So if I ever, like if I was at an evidence in motion weekend or whatnot, I have an idea of where their education has been at before this. But as I teach TMD with evidence in motion, it's not people that have been through their management programs and whatnot. And so it's a more varied. So I have a tougher time then, and I realize of seeing where's most people at. I know where most people are at that I listen to, that I talk to, the residencies that we've had of people with fellowships and residencies of people that in our program or in our practice, where theirs are, but I also advocated they go to ones that, coincide with, more of my beliefs with it as well. So I know there's still gurus out there, but I don't really associate with them that much.
And I think our profession's generally moving away from the whole guruism approach, where there's this one gray-haired individual on stage who, you were kind of bowing at their feet. And I know that's a little extreme take on it, but yeah, and it sounds like you've created a setting and founded on good clinical reasoning, good critical thinking, and it makes sense, right? If you're a business, you all probably need to be discussing things and working with things in a somewhat similar fashion. If you have somebody who's in your practice who's going way off in the left field, I've seen this with students I've mentored and talked to, where they're in clinics where they're very traditional, maybe guru-based manual therapy, and they're trying to do a very different approach. That doesn't necessarily work well when you're the lone wolf in that setting. What have you found the strengths of, like, getting into that residency and fellowship training when you're looking at maybe yourself, but also your employees, to kind of provide a standard of care, I guess you would say, to deliver a product that you're as a company proud of?
Yeah, there's probably multiple aspects I could answer with that. When I started, it wasn't a business decision. It was I don't want everybody that comes to the practice to want to have to see me. That does me no good if I'm working 60 hours a week seeing patients and everybody else is sitting around there. Because when you're practicing on a day-to-day basis and they know you're there, if everybody says, "Oh, can I see Dr. Rainey?" That's not a good business model. That's not good. That's not good for me personally. And I think it's important that people go through residency and fellowship training or some type of long track training. They need mentorship. That's really what they need. And they need structured mentorship. If you don't get structured mentorship, it's difficult to become an expert quickly. And I need these people to become experts. We can't wait a few years. And so it was mostly based off of my principles that I think that it's important originally. And it's turned into a very good business decision. Every place else in our county has struggles to recruit and hire. And I don't want to say we don't snap our fingers and somebody's there, but always within a few months or within the year, we've had people and we've been able to recruit quite well from it. Because if you're just looking for jobs out there, there's a ton of jobs out there. And if you're just going to base it off of pay and location, and hours and benefits, there's going to be a lot of competition. If you're basing off somewhere where they'll pay completely for your education, and you're going to get structured mentorship and you align with that person. Some people go into residency and fellowship programs where they don't align with the person, that they're learning from. Then it's been a great recruiting tool for us.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? As a student, I don't see how you look at that. I mean, it's tough, though. I think there's probably some students out there who see, because I think some settings will dangle maybe higher salaries at you because they're going to throw high volume at you, high productivity. And I honestly reflect back, I don't know if I would survive in those practices, but you get in other settings where you see a progression, you see like this movement towards expertise like you spoke of. Bringing it back to mentorship that you spoke about, because I think that's been one of the keys that I think it's overlooked sometimes, where everybody envisions, I think, at least some of my discussions, that manual therapy training is just this like learning how to perfect like just some of these dated, maybe theoretical models of, very highly specific segmental assessments and stuff like that. And I'm not saying there might be not times where we can kind of figure out some specifics, of course, but where has, it sounds like mentorship for you started pretty much right in school, which is I'm jealous because I didn't really have that. I had great faculty, but it wasn't that kind of setup that you had at Rocky Mountain there, where you have Tim Flynn and obviously somebody who's kind of a legend in the profession of manual therapy as far as really kind of pushing us to think a little deeply. What's your personal experience been with mentorship? Have you had the experience that I think many of us have, where you got knocked down a few pegs coming into things, thinking we just had a discussion last night at dinner or before dinner, and it was about how like we kind of come into these situations thinking like we got some things figured out, man. I think I got this. I think I'm good. Did you have any of those experiences with your mentorship where you had to kind of get set down a little bit in a professional way, right? Most of my experiences with mentorship have been great, but what's been your experience?
Yeah. So the experience that I thought last night was it was early on in one of the courses that was a bit later in fellowship. And I thought, I had the 45-week clinical, with fellows, and it was a really quality education. Then I had residency. I'd been through half a fellowship. I was feeling pretty good about myself. And I submitted a video. I was like, man, they're gonna be like, wow, who's this guy? That was not what it was like, as you could imagine. And I was like, well, they just don't know. Well, that person, I really blew it on the eval. Like I totally misgauged where she was at. I thought it was like an acute on a subacute. Well, I didn't ask enough questions, and it was acute on subacute on chronic. She was in our clinic for like 100 visits. I mean, it was a workers' comp, so they kept approving more. And so you can't not, it wasn't like, this isn't medically necessary. Like they said, well, just keep seeing her. And so like, I kept trying. I mean, I kept trying new thing after new thing. I was searching. And I was like, that was a very good lesson on that video, that I didn't do a good job. They were exactly right in the feedback they gave me, but I also don't make that mistake anymore.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think some of those learning experiences are the ones that get seared into your memory, that when you see that presentation come in, like not going to happen again, especially when you've had some criticisms and some good, again, professional mentorship is all about not just patting you on the back of like, oh my God, you're so good of a therapist. And that's kind of how I thought I was going to be. Like I say, oh yeah, same thing. Like, here's my video. We'll have them watch this, and they're going to be like, man, this guy's got it figured out. And it was the exact opposite of that. I remember I went through it with my buddy Jason Steer, and we both were texted. I was texting him while he was doing his. I was like, man, I got your back. This is rough. And we're both like acting as support systems, because it's that critical thinking, clinical reasoning piece that I think gets so overlooked. And it's not just with how you're going to use your hands, but how you're going to stage a patient. Where's pain science education going to fit in? Is even hands-on care, indicated for a patient? So I think sometimes, again, these programs get kind of perceived as it's just a bunch of like sitting around tables and, everybody's watching somebody manipulate. And there's some technical skill. I mean, obviously you have to have some technical skill in delivering some of these things. Has that been your experience too, where it's been, it's been much more about like the thinking and reasoning piece versus like, there's some technical piece. We both went through a similar journey with it. I mean, there's courses where you have to like show proficiency in that, but to me, that was like about 10 to 20% of the journey. How was it with you?
Yeah. I often think about how much is it the technical component versus everything else. And I don't know that it's hard to separate that out. I mean, I know there's research, I can't spout it off, but that when the patient believes that you're good, they get better faster. And so when you're better with your hands, is that because you're a ninja, or is that because then they believe you more? And I don't think we can separate that out.
It's a good point. I think there is like this nonverbal communication of just skilled handling of a patient, right? It probably isn't the minutia of like you said, like ninja type stuff, or is it just like you can command like an interaction and show supportive, handling of a patient to where they almost like, man, this guy really uses his hands well, makes me feel comfortable, makes me feel supported, makes me feel like I can kind of move on my journey. Yeah. I think that's a good point because it is more than the ninja skills for sure. I'm wondering because this is a selfish thing because I don't see a ton of TMJ orofacial pain, and we're at a pain science conference, and that population seems to fit well with pain science things because there's often stressors and psychosocial things. I'm wondering where that came from in your practice. Is it just something that you had a special interest in that you kind of just dovetailed into, or did you see a need in your community that needed to be filled, or how did that kind of show up for you?
Yeah, so I was near the end of fellowship training, and we had very little in fellowship training, and that's not a criticism of it. You can't do everything. And I realized, one, there was a hole in the community. Two, I realized that I treated some of those people and they got better, but I don't really know why. I basically do some manual therapy and exercise and words that heal and not harm. And they did pretty well, but I was like, I think I could do this better. And now that I have the clinical reasoning aspect, I felt pretty nailed down. And I'm skilled with a lot of elsewhere. If I could just add this, it would really help. And I thought it would help me be able to teach more as well. And so I flew out to New Jersey. Jeff Mannheimer, I'd looked at he'd been treating only orofacial pain longer than I'd been alive. And I was like, well, I have, most of the rest of the body I'm doing pretty well with. I should be able to learn something from him. And I did. It was some rough red-eye flights there. I wouldn't go to bed that night. I'd eat dinner in Sierra Vista. I'd hop on a flight. I'd walk into the clinic the next morning, and it's tough to stay awake during those. But and so that's really why I went into that aspect.
So this was after fellowship where you decided like, hey, I need to this is somewhere I need to like up my game. So you decided I'm going to find somebody who's doing it, who's been, like you said, doing it longer than you've been alive. And those are the people you search out. I think that's a good example of like a clinician who's striving for expertise, right? And that whole mentorship piece, right? And I'd recommend anybody. And it doesn't, this is just something that sounds like you arranged with him to say, hey, can I come hang out with you? Or did he have more of a formal program?
It was a small formal program. There were 6 of us.
Okay.
And so it was 3 separate weekends we went out there. And my wife said, go for it, which when you have, how many kids do we have at that point? We had 3, I think we had 3, maybe it was 4 kids by then. So it was quite supportive of her.
Yeah, no, happy wife, happy life. And that's awesome when we have spouses that support us on our journey for sure. I'm fortunate in the same with my wife. But that's still like, again, that mentorship piece of like, there's only so much you can do. It sounds like it was very much like we're going to be treating patients and you're going to be seeing, kind of how we do it. Has that been the structure of that program?
Yeah, we did have a live patient come in there, and it was, there was a decent amount of lecture with it, but when there's 1 versus, 1 on 6, you get a lot of like, this is what I'm seeing on here. There's a lot of questions, that he could say, this is how I attribute, this is when I do this. And I knew that I wanted to teach. So I had already, I was taking notes like, okay, that's when I add this in here. Cause I'd done a little bit of it. And that's when I add this in here. And it was just very helpful it wasn't early on in my career, so it wasn't an intro piece. And so it just helped finish it off for me.
Sure. As you've been exposed to pain science, that's obviously been a big explosive topic in the last 30 years. Where have you seen that fit into that orofacial population? Like, are there kind of some common themes you see that come out with that, or common issues or things that you feel like with pain science, you've really maybe taken a little bit deeper look with people to see some different factors that you may not have considered in the past?
Yeah. So with it, I do see orofacial pain, which encompasses headaches and TMJ issues. And obviously with headaches, migraines, if you look at the central sensitization inventory B, so the A is the 25 questions. The B is have you been diagnosed with any of these conditions? TMJ is on there, and so is migraine on there. I think a whiplash is on there, all things that are correlated with that. So when we talk about chronic overlapping pain conditions, that's where, so I've also done some pelvic health training as well. And a lot of people say there's the overlap between there. And so I really like pain and ortho, and which is why I've expanded into both of those. It's not a new niche. It's expanding on the niche that I'm already in. And so one thing that I focus on with them, I have them all do is CSI-B or CSI-A. So if they have a 40 or over on there, I know that person isn't going to get as better as quickly as I think they may. And I remember one person, I was like, oh, maybe this one doesn't line up. I think this person will get better faster. Nope, I was wrong. If it comes in with like a 23 on there, a little bit of jaw popping or clicking, a little bit of an ache, that's like a 3 or 4 visit person. If it's achy, and it's a 70 on the CSI, that person is taking longer. I've got to make sure that I don't treat them as just nociceptive pain. I've got to work on that some, but I'm really hitting the lifestyle factors and beliefs and identifying where's the limitation, where's the hang up here.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that too, having worked, again, a little bit limited with that, there can be, if somebody's got a massively stressful situation that they're not addressing or they're struggling to cope with, then, incorporating, maybe some other professionals or doing it. Do you have the access to that in your setting to where you can kind of like you see like psychosocially, there's some things going on outside of your clinic that are maybe driving that condition? I mean, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so the easy answer is it depends. I've worked to develop relationships with individuals in town. Most aren't great at talking to them about pain, as you know. There's some that are really good with pain, but some are going to be doing just other things. There's also limited access. Sometimes it's hard to get people to go see somebody else. It's like, hey, you need to go here. We even, with one of the, I forget what exact her degree is, but she was a counselor or therapist of some kind. And we put on the paper, like, this is what she'll do, this is what we'll do, and we give it out to people. And it didn't work magically either. But some people are already seeing somebody. It has helped. I don't know how many of my people see BetterHelp, but there's more online avenues with this. So that has helped access. A lot of people that I bring this up with, like, hey, this is looking like high anxiety here. How have you been dealing with that? Easy question. Like, they marked it. I'm not like trying to probe on something that I'm reading between the lines. They marked it there for me. How are we dealing with that? That's an easy question. And a lot of times they're already doing something. And so I'm saying, okay, you keep that up. I want you to know how important I think that is. Because I want them to know I'm not glossing over that, but I'm not, if they're seeing another professional for it, I don't need to delve into that. Extremely, we're going to work on the pain aspects. I'm going to work on their fitness. I'm going to work on helping them understand it, not be so worried about it, give them some other day-to-day management strategies. And then if there's still problems, then we can look for other avenues for it. So.
Yeah, it sounds like a reasonable approach. I think, it's always interesting, like Service, a smaller community, I think, right? It's not a big one. And it's tough to find pain psychologists and things. And you're right, like patients some just don't see, one, it's like, I'm here for my pain. Where's the psychology thing? And then it becomes this, well, you're telling me it's all in my head thing. Is that something you've had to be tread lightly with as far as with patients to say, hey, I need you to see this person, but there's obviously a nuance to that probably discussion to make sure they understand the why and how it fits into what you're doing. How do you handle it?
Yeah, better than I used to. It feels like I used to have the, you think it's all in my head type of things, and I'd be like scrambling back. No, that's not what I said. I haven't had that experience in a while, so I don't know if I'm just doing it better or if I'm just not having the discussion as much. Maybe I think that I am. Things that I've done to work on that is, one thing I'll often say is nobody ever told me that their stress made their pain better. It's an easy, everybody nods to that. And as a salesman, you want people nodding. And I'm trying to sell them on what's going on with this, right? And so no one's ever said, yeah, I've been more stressed. My pain all went away. So then it just opens that up. And I also say, hey, I realize that if I just say, well, don't be stressed. And I will say that jokingly so they know it. I'm like, I know some people will say that, like, that's not helpful. I'm here, let's work on this, because that's going to be an aspect of it. I also always let them know that if I'm telling them something they're going to be skeptical about, I emphasize, I bring that up before they have to. Like, I don't think just by not having stress, all your pain is going to go away. But I think it's a component of it. And so that's something that I really focus on. If I want them to do some aerobic exercise, I don't think going on a walk is going to take all their jaw pain away. But it's a component of it. If they're sedentary, being more physically active is going to help their health and just everything. And so I bring out the skepticism before they have to bring it to me. So I head it up front there.
Yeah, that's a great approach. I think sometimes, and you once you've been doing it enough, you know where the skepticism is probably going to come back at you. So you can kind of head it off at the pass before you allow the immediate kind of the blank stares that come back at you and the kind of folding the arms and just, you can just see the skepticism in them. But yeah, that's a great thought process to kind of hit it before it comes back at you because same thing I do. And it's this is not to say I always will just first off, don't ever hear that I'm telling you this is all in your head. Like that is the last thing. This is in your life. Part of it is your head. I mean, like you said, it's a component and it's in all of our heads when we're experiencing pain and it's disrupting life. And then, you just list off the things that they're talking to you about, all the things, how it's changed their life and really moved them maybe in a negative direction. But yeah, I think that nuance to it. And it sounds like you've honed your discussion with patients to where, likely those immediate whoa, reactions coming back at you have probably decreased just from, maybe taking your lumps in those conversations.
Many lumps.
Yeah, I think we've all done it, man. We've all had those lumps for sure. I want to bring it back because I love what you do. And some people get so uncomfortable when this word is even uttered in healthcare, sales, right? And I think, one of the things I've looked at is sales training, because it's just, you're trying to sell somebody on what you're offering, right? And I think for most of us, if we're evidence-based, we're science-based, we're using the best interest of our patient's hand, it's our duty to try to sell it well, right? And I just think that is such a skill that it doesn't get taught in school, right? I mean, I think we do it kind of implicitly without any explicit understandings of how much, and some folks don't really maybe take too much of a specific sales training approach type thing, but how often do you think of that as a sales, situation? As a business owner, I think it's smart to do that, and it's not in a way that let me see if I can empty this person's wallet as much as possible. I'm sure there's some horrible examples of that out there in healthcare, but I have something that I know can help this person. The research tells me I can help this person. But there's a lot of competing narratives out there. How do I position my product or what I'm offering this patient in a way that can move them towards, this journey with me? Do you look at sales kind of specifically do you look at those encounters? Again, not in the generic, QVC trying to sell you on a bag of goods type thing, but what's been your approach or thought process around the whole sales process? Yeah.
I definitely think about that a lot. And again, like you said, not in a financial way. I tell people that you have if everything else fails on the first visit, you got two responsibilities. One, rule out urgent red flags. If they need to be to the emergency room before they come in again, you better not miss that. We can miss a red flag that's slow growing, that we're not sure this is concerning. Let's see how they do by visit 2. We can't miss the urgent ones. That's a hard pass. Second one is get them to come back for visit 2. The chances of helping somebody completely in visit 1 is pretty low. It's not never, but it's pretty low. So vast majority of the time, whatever mistakes you make, if they come back for visit 2, you get a chance to come up to bat again and see what you can do. And to emphasize with people that the focus is not on the financial aspect of it for our clinicians, is that we'll bonus them as long as they and the patient know it's their last day. I don't care if it's visit 1, 2, or 20. We'll bonus them. And even if that's not the best financial decision, the focus I always want is to make sure that they and the patient know that care is concluded for that episode, if it's going to be concluded. Some people need booster sessions and to go on for sure. So again, it's not a financial thing. It's to sell them on what they need. And sometimes I'm selling them on going to somebody else, maybe they need an x-ray. Maybe that I'm concerned that it's a fracture. Maybe they need a surgery. Sometimes people need a surgery so they don't have permanent nerve damage, and if we don't have good shared decision making, they've got to be able to see what decision are they making there. And so something I've specifically done some training with recently, some reading and worked with our people on, is not using the question why. So why brings out defensive measures. How and what. And so if you look at motivational interview training, it talks about rolling with resistance. Why brings out resistance? We don't want to bring out resistance. We want to be able to roll with it and ideally have less resistance. So we can ask a lot of the same question, but without bringing out why. And again, that's the sales aspect. If you're trying to sell somebody a car, you don't want resistance. You want everybody happy and nodding, and you want to have low tension. With higher tension, people don't give as good of answers. They don't think as clearly. And so I rarely ask why questions.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like you're very purposeful in your consideration in yourself and in of your employees as well, of like their communication, right? To where you're being very mindful of that. Has that been something that you prioritized immediately, like coming out of school? Like, I need to be like the most amazing communicator. I mean, for me, I prioritize more my hands-on technical skills. And then it became utterly apparent that, your hands, that can be part of it, of course, the skills there, but your communication allows you to not be as good. that gets you another, like you said, at bat visit too, even if it didn't go as well as you wanted. But if you can communicate, sell the patient on what you're doing, how it's going to help them, and they buy into where they're going to give you a little bit of leeway versus, and our friend Jared Hall just put a post on social media about like, how he'd take the choice of like the best communicator, person-centered person versus the most highly skilled, technical, evidence-based person. He'd probably take the communicator on the first end because he can move them and train them into a better evidence-based, skilled practitioner. And what's been your journey with communication, like as far as how's that kind of fit into your practice and in your being purposeful with the thought process around it?
Yeah, so I guess different and similar. Different in the fact that before I went to physical therapy school, I did a decent amount of sales. And I was also a missionary for our church for 2 years. So I was talking to new people all throughout the day, every day, and always thinking, how do I, head off resistance? As far as my focusing on it in a clinical aspect, researching, figuring out trainings for it has been later in my career, which is what happens to most people. And I don't know, rarely do we get one or the other with people, right? A lot of times in school, we have to be skilled. We have to make sure that we don't miss red flags. I'd rather somebody that doesn't miss red flags than be a good communicator, if they need to be in the emergency room. And so we're hitting those things in school. And then like most people, as they start to become better, they're realizing where the holes are, and it's communication. Rarely do we ever see somebody becomes a really good communicator and then they get more skilled, right? And so I don't know why that is. Is that a limitation, or is that just a feature of what's normal human tendencies? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair thought. I do think sometimes in the health profession, and I may be a little bit of a symptom of the biomedicalism, where it's more like I'm going to find the pathology and fix it. Where I don't want to say it's de-emphasized. I think in our program and what we see in our university, I think we're getting much more conscious of how we communicate and how we involve the patient and all those things. I just think maybe there's a little bit of that sometimes where we, in our early training, we're so focused on maybe the technical and the pathoanatomy and kinesiology and biomechanics and all the things that, again, have their place, but just maybe not, prioritize as much as they do, especially when you come on the clinic floor, when you're coming out of school and those PowerPoints aren't lining up with the patients in front of you, and you got to form some sort of a coherent narrative with the patient. And that's just where I think folks that have that sales background and like you, I think have a leg up to be able to, because you've rolled with resistance already. You've been in those uncomfortable conversations where resistance is coming back, and you've been able to diffuse situations and move somebody forward. Did you find that something that just kind of came a little bit naturally with your background?
Yeah, I never thought about it too much until I was we get a lot of students, and one of the students like, how did you do that? And I was like, and I hadn't thought of it specifically. And so then I'd started paying attention, like, hey, I said that really well in that situation. And I'm like, I think that's where some other people will struggle is, what do I say in that situation? And it's still hard. Like, there's times I do manual therapy so I can think. It's hard if I'm just staring at you and I don't know what to say. That can get awkward kind of quick. But if I'm like working on your shoulder, your back, well, I'm thinking, sometimes I just need to think. And I'm like, I don't know what to say to you right now. And so I'm doing manual therapy so I can think, and it's not awkward.
Yeah. Hey, we got to sometimes buy us some headspace to kind of navigate some of those situations. I think we've all probably been there to where, okay, I need some time to kind of collect my thoughts and kind of, yeah, because you're right. If you're just sitting there and with blank stares looking at each other, it gets awkward real quick. I want to respect your time, and we got a conference to head out to here in a little bit, but I'm wondering, like, online, where can folks find your clinic? I know, we sometimes get patients, of course, listening, but also clinicians who might be interested, like, hey, man, I want to go learn from Nick. And especially if any of y'all are looking at orofacial pain, obviously Nick's got an amazing practice and really is teaching and walking the talk daily in his practice. Where can folks find you online?
If you Google my name, I think our practice will come up. On our main page, I think we have a page of different areas where I'm teaching and whatnot. We're overhauling our website right now, so I think that's accurate still. If not, we'll get that changed. I have a decent number of low back courses on Physio Plus. Physiopedia is its Con Ed platform, where I really go through a lot of the way I evaluate low back pain, the thoughts that I have to it. There's videos and some readings and whatnot. So that's low back there. EIM, I do TMD courses with. I don't think we have any scheduled right now, but if you reach out to them, we do have one. I'm going to be teaching one in Utah with Rocky Mountain in November. And so that link should be coming up. We just set it up a couple days ago, so that link should be up there pretty soon. We also have an online one in the summer. That one is on Rocky Mountain's page. There's always different things coming up. So if they find, Google it and they can email me, or I can give you my email. You can put it in the show notes. That'd be totally cool.
Yeah, we'll drop a lot of that in the show notes. And I wish you would just get busy with some things. It sounds like you're just bored with your life. It's whenever I see what you're up to, I'm like, dang, dude, that guy is up to something. He's always got some good things going. And kudos to you for doing that, man. You give back a lot to the profession and really pay it forward. So thanks for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. I love your podcast. I've listened to, I think, well over 75% of the episodes since it started. So I appreciate being on here.
Well, we appreciate you listening. We appreciate you all who are listening or watching on YouTube. If you can subscribe on YouTube, we'd love that. Or if you can subscribe on your podcast vendor, we'd love that as well. We'll leave that there this week. We'll talk to you all next week.